Tonight we have what we would call an authentic voice. And that authentic voice comes from a place that is called Australia. Now, Australia is the world's second smallest continent, second, I think, only to Antarctica. It's way, way, way a long way away. It's down south. In fact, some people call it down under. The word Australia, the word Australia is derived from the word austral, which means great south land. But in our eyes, it's not so great. Now, perhaps 60,000 years ago, black-skinned people, we would call them African people with straight to wavy hair textures, began to move into Australia. 60,000 years ago. And they are very proud and glorious people. Sometimes they are known by the simple term Aborigine, which just means native or indigenous. We have been told that they are called Koori, a term which seems to mean the people. And they lived in harmony for about 60,000 years. And then on January 1st, 1788, Captain Cook, I believe, led an invasion by the British that consisted of the resettlement of British convicts, British prisoners into Australia. Now, at that time, there were probably about 3 million black people there. And within 75 years, they had probably been reduced to about 100,000 people. Their story is very similar to that of the Native American, if you can use that parallel. It was not uncommon, as I said before, for black people in Australia in the 19th century to be used for dog food, to be casually used for target practice. There's even an article, and I circulated it to some extent, called The Angel of Black Death. And it's about a European woman who organized a grave robbing network. And in some cases, black people in Australia were actually hunted and stalked to get their bones for scientific research. Black people in Australia, the Koori, the Aborigine, were not counted as part of the national census, as I understand, until about 1967. They have had every degradation, humiliation visited upon them. But tonight we have an authentic voice to speak to that issue. And you could say that she represents the triumph of our people, who in the face of all odds, in the face of almost certain annihilation, managed to survive that. And she's with us to tell us that story. Now, I could go on and on, but we want to devote much of the evening as possible to the sister. I don't think she's ever been here before. She is a member of our family, and it is a very rare opportunity that we have tonight. She will be speaking tonight, and then she'll also speak tomorrow evening and then Sunday afternoon. But right now, we'd like to bring her on with the Talking Drum, Black Friday, Good Life. Very special welcome to Sister Grace Smallwood. Okay, Sister. Right.
Well, thanks very much for that wonderful introduction, my brother. And good evening, elders, and my sisters and brothers. And someone said today that we had an accent, but I think you guys have got an accent. So as our brother has talked about the history, and I just said to my friend Marie that brother there has done his homework with our history in Australia, which is our last slogan when there was a big birthday party in 1988. The black political activists, one of us, many of my family are political activists, and we sent out these flyers saying that white Australia has a black history. And it's quite correct, and the document, Angel of Black Death, I actually quote most of that because it's spot on about the atrocities that have happened to my people. And as my brother said here, my people, the Aboriginal race, has been in Australia for 60,000 years. And the recent, the megafauna, the archaeology studies are showing that our burial grounds are actually proving that our people have been there for thousands and thousands of years. My own background, as I said, I solidly identify as an Aboriginal. this is not my language, it is the British language. Before the white people came to our country on the 26th of January in 1788, there were over 700 different dialects and 500 different languages. And my Aboriginal clan from my ancestors is called the Birragubba clan. And we live, for those who haven't been to Australia, up in North Queensland. I suppose you've seen the Great Barrier Reef. Well, my town is Townsville, which is around that area. It's a coastal town. But what actually happened when our fine visitors arrived, my people had never spoken a British language, nor did they have the religion of Christianity. We had our own religion, and we had our Aboriginal religion was about treating Mother Earth with respect and looking after each other. We never had a system of today, of a Western system that is very capitalistic. There's so much competition in the world that we were sharing and caring. But I was one of the privileged blacks who have survived against all odds, because it wasn't until 1967 that we were counted as human beings and given the right of citizenship and given the right to vote, to drink alcohol and to go to school. I did say 67, my dear. So 1967. Now before that, from 1788 to 1967, black Australians were regarded under the Flora and Fauna Act. And and the atrocities were, as my brother said, were horrific. But many people don't find out about this. We call our country the secret country because Australia is promoted as a land of milk and honey and a very white country. And it also had a white immigration policy until only a few years ago. Now, years ago, not so many years ago, that when black Americans came to our country, the brothers were not allowed to get off their ships because Australia had an all-white immigration policy. Only the white people were allowed to visit because of this legislation we had. And there were 3 million, maybe 4 million people in 1788, but today the recent count now is that we're 300,000 left. We represent 1.6% of the national population. Now, after the scientific trade, Darwin's theory of evolution, they were trying to prove because our people treated Mother Earth the way we treated ourselves, with total respect. And there was a contrast in our religious beliefs. There was a contrast in every aspect of life of the Western people. So when the Western people came to our country, and this history has all been oral history handed down to me from my father, from my grandfather, and it has continued. And again, as I said, I was one of the privileged to be able to make it through a Western system, as because my grandfather and my father were political activists. They said, you have to get a Western education, but you have to be very smart, and not forget your cultural identity to make sure you can beat the Western people at their own game. And it's been very difficult for my people, and I've bought 17 of my family were quite shocked when they go into supermarkets and everywhere and see black people working behind the counters, because racism is a fact of life in my country, and it's really, they're not shooting us now or kicking our babies' heads off, because they used to use that as a sport. They used to line our little babies up and see who could kick the babies' heads the furthest as a sport. And they poisoned our water holes, they shot many of our people, and because they tried to prove Darwin's theory of evolution, that my people who were hunter-gatherers came, that was connecting to the earth, and especially our traditional healers, who were wise men and women. They knew about the rains, they knew about healings, they knew about herbs. They were the first ones that were being destroyed by Western people. So they poisoned the water holes. If they didn't just shoot our people, they just literally massacred a lot of our people. The remaining ones, what they did, they put them on what they call missions or reserves. The history of Aboriginal Australia is very similar to the Black American history. and to the Native American history when they brought your ancestors over here from Africa. I too have studied a lot of your black history and histories of the world. Now, on my grandfather's side, who was a traditional Aboriginal man, he married a South Sea Island lady who's my grandmother. And all of our South Sea Island people look very much like black Americans. They all have the curly hair, but a lot of them don't straighten their hair. They don't have dreadlocks, they have afro hair. Absolutely. And so it's been, I was looking at everyone today and thought, wow, this is unreal. So, and how the South Pacific people came to my country, they were all brought over as slaves from the South Pacific to Australia and used in slave labour to cut the sugar cane. And so that was the empire of our sugar cane farms. But most of the South Sea people that came over there had the choice of going back, but many had actually intermarried into Aboriginal Australians. And what happened during this crisis when the Western people came, if any of our people were caught speaking language or practising any of our tradition or doing our corroborees, or we had women's and men's business, they were killed. And when they herded up the rest of our people and put them on missions and reserves, they had to learn English, and they had to have nothing to do with Aboriginal religion. They had to have Christianity, and a lot of the people were removed and decimated apart from being separated from their families. And a lot of our women were used as sexual servants for their white masters. They were taken to look after the white people's home, and then a lot of our women were being raped. And out of this sexual abuse of literally thousands of our black women, many half-caste children were born. My father was one of those half-caste children. And what the government did, because they wanted to get rid of the black problem, they decided that they couldn't annihilate any more of our people, so they put them on the reserves. Now, how they had the legal powers to do that, what happened at the time, South Africa was looking for a program to look after the black Africans. They wanted an apartheid system that was very intact. So a legislation in my country called the Aborigines Protection Act, which gave the constitutional powers to remove any half-caste children from their families, and they were sent away, and most of them never saw their families again. So that Protection Act, the South African apartheid was actually modelled on, because it was a distinct apartheid system. My father was about 5 years of age, as he told me this story before he passed on to the Dreamtime. He said that he was playing on the riverbanks because his father was a healer and used to pass down all the medicines and the herbs, and they were playing around on the riverbanks, and he recalls the story that grandfather had told him just before he was taken away. And the story was that grandfather said that if you don't look after Mother Earth, if you rape Mother Earth, then the whole world is going to be reaping what they sow, because we have to treat Mother Earth like we treat ourselves. And my dad asked him, how did they survive for so many thousands of years without polluting the planet, polluting Australia, and having enough food to go around to all the different tribes? And he told him how they hunted for fish, that when they used to go to get the fish, the wise men who knew about the rains and the winds would go to the lake, and they'd get some herbs and they'd crush them. And if they had to feed 50 people, they would make sure before they took the fish from the lake that they would pray to the great spirits and ask if it was okay to do so. Then they'd crush these herbs and throw them on the lake, and they would make sure, and what this herb did, it was like an anaesthetic. It would draw the fish to the top of the lake, and the fish wouldn't be dead. It would just give them like a local anaesthetic for a while and knock them out. And what the wise men would do, they would have a look at the fish to see if there was a balance of the male and female. And And then if there was, they would then take the fish equally and cut them and make sure that they only took enough food out of that lake for the clan that they were feeding. They never took extra. Now, when they did that, they would wait until the anaesthetic would go away from the fish until the fish went back and was safe. Now, if there was an unequal balance of the fish, the wise men then would send a signal, which was this, we didn't have mobile telephones, they would send a signal to the next tribe and tell them that there was an unequal balance of a certain fish. It meant then that that food was taboo until it was time for the male and the female to mate. Now, and all those signals were sent all around the area. Now, if anyone was caught with that food that was taboo until the elders and the wise men sent another smoke signal to say it's all okay, we used to have what we call customary law. If you broke that law, you were in a lot of trouble. You could be killed. So it was all very different to the Western law. It's how much money you've got, you can get away with murder. I've just been reading about LA sometime. I just forget what that was about. Just kidding. So, but you see, in our country, black people are not rich. We're very oppressed. Our communities are very dysfunctional. We have a lot of domestic violence. We have a lot of child molestation. You name it, we've got it. And we're 1.5% of the population. We represent 14% of the prison population. It was only 5 years ago in my country, in the state of Queensland, where black people were allowed to buy land, because it was only, as I said, in 1967 that we were given citizenship. Now, my grandfather went to war, and when he came home from the war, he was not allowed to go and march in the street with the white ones that went to war, and he also wasn't allowed to have alcohol or attend the royal, the RSL, the clubs that the servicemen drink at, because he wasn't a citizen in his own country. Now, apart from surviving all these atrocities, and my father said that was the last story he heard about how to hunt, about our law. He was 5 or 6 years of age. And then they were playing on the riverbank, so there was about 24 black kids. Some were very dark, some were fair. My dad was very fair. And the police van pulled up and came over and took 3 to 5 of the fair-skinned people, or the brown-skinned babies. We call them the brown-skinned mob. And Dad was one of them. And the police said that they'd done something wrong and they had to take them for a ride. So my dad said that he was driving in the car for about an hour and a half. It seemed like forever, because he wanted to go back to his mum and dad. And so the police took them out of the van and put them on a boat, and then they went across to a reserve, and that reserve is called Palm Island. And that was where my father had to stay, and he never saw his father again, but did see his mother and never saw any of his brothers and sisters till a few years before he died. And that was like the reservations like Native Americans were placed on. And it was there that my dad said that he had to learn to read and write and speak English very quickly. And he told me that when they were caught speaking their own Aboriginal language, that they were beaten, and some of them were actually killed. And so it was the stigma of a lot of our women that were being raped by a lot of the white men, and all these little brown-skinned babies were being born. And so if they didn't send them to a reserve, they actually sent them away to like a boarding school and brought them up to be white, and actually told a lot of these fair-skinned children that their parents didn't want them, that they were alcoholics, that they were drug addicts. And then you probably heard, if you know some of my history, and I'm sure my brother here, who is spot on with my history, there's a program at home called Link Up, where a lot of half-caste children who were brought up to be white are now finding out that they were black, and they were removed because of the shame of what the government allowed to happen to my people. And so they're all linking up to try and connect back to a lot of their family, because many are starting to connect with their family, but of course many died. Now, the reason why there's so much alcohol and drug abuse in our communities is because of the dysfunction of being removed from their family units and being either taken to a reserve or moved down south to a Western school. Now, in one area, some of the research showed that there were 5,300 Indigenous half-caste children removed physically from their families and sent to one welfare home, and they were all brought up to be white. And a lot of those people have died without meeting any of their families, but the ones that have survived, they're very bitter, they're very angry. We do have a lot of violence at home, not just within our own communities, black against white, but we don't have the numbers like you have over here. And in 1952 to 1957, because we weren't citizens, the Australian government gave permission to the British government to test their nuclear weapons on land that Aboriginal people were actually living around the Pinjarra lands, and I don't have to tell you what the devastation of nuclear testing is. And so they were allowed to drop atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs all in the area where Aboriginal clans were physically living. The recent research has shown that the bomb testing in that particular area was 20 times greater than the bombs dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, I don't know whether I had the fortune or the unfortunate to be working in that area, because I'm a midwife, I'm a registered nurse, and my postgrad studies is obstetrics, where I deliver babies, and I've also done my mental health, and I have a Master of Science degree in HIV. I'm now doing my PhD on traditional healing practices, in contrast to the Western medical model. Thank you. So what I've been doing is collecting this research on my people, on people of the world. I've been to Japan and I've been to many places where there has been nuclear testing, and the deformities of babies, the high incidence of cancers on people in the world wherever there's been nuclear testing is just astounding. So the white people that are actually involved in the tests around the Maralinga lands actually wore the full protective clothing. Many of those people have either died or got cancer or are producing deformed babies. Now, they're trying to get compensation from the British and the Australian government, and they had all the protective clothing. At that time, the traditional people of that area never wore shoes and very rarely just wore minimum clothing. They were still living extremely traditional. So you can imagine the radiation fallout and the effects on that whole clan of people. And I worked in that area, and I've delivered babies there, and I've seen a lot of massive side effects from this nuclear testing. And a friend of mine, Mr. Yami Lester, who actually is still alive, he witnessed it. He was about 7 years of age when all the children were playing and looked up to the sky and they saw a big black mushroom, and everything was falling on them, and the next day they had diarrhea, vomiting and sores all over their bodies, and he recalls that everyone was very, very sick, and 3 years later Yami went blind and many people had died. Now, what the governments, not just in my country but around the world, are trying to say that mining uranium, that the nuclear testing, there's no danger to Mother Earth or to human beings. And yet the people that I've spoken to all around the globe have the same stories. They have the same abnormal births. Many of our men and women are sterile. Some of my sisters in the South Pacific, where we all sat on a panel at the World Anti-Uranium Conference in Salzburg in Austria, they had people from all around the world, black and white, actually came there to tell their horror stories. And one of our sisters said that since the French have been testing in the South Pacific, we are producing double-headed monster babies that are jelly. Now, jelly babies are babies born without skin. Double heads, there's two heads maybe. They're so disfigured. Now, the governments are trying to hide all this. But can I say, wherever they nuclear test, because the world is round, if it was flat, We could let all the wastage go over. Everyone on this planet is affected by nuclear fallout, by nuclear testing. So the whole government system, which is capitalistic, are all sticking together, because if they give one compensation claim to any individual on this planet that has become sterile, that has got deformed babies, or has some horrific fallout, radiation sickness, then governments of the world have to compensate literally billions. Because what happened in the Maralinga lands, where my people were removed after that, it is still radioactive. So what the government's done is put all these barbed wire fences around the desert. So when it rains, so when the winds go, and there's radiation sand, because you only need a grain of radiation sand to enter your body. If you're pregnant, you produce a deformed baby, or you can get cancer, or you can become sterile. So when all those grains of sand go literally thousands and thousands of miles when there's a tornado, or when it rains, it's acid rain, then people are affected all over the planet. And the French testing, all of our waters and all of our fish, they're all connecting globally. You cannot get rid of radiation. So I can talk for hours, my brother. And what's actually happened now is, when do I stop?
You have some more time. I want to have probably a question.
Okay.
Okay. Two things. One, please say something about the dream time. And before you finish, tell us what you want us to do.
Okay, right. I'm actually, my present position now is a professor at a university in a very racist town. And interesting, and I forget, I keep thinking we've got to keep talking, but there are about 6 black professors in my country, and there are about 7 black doctors, and there are about 7 PhD black graduates, and I'll probably be the 8th next year. So we have a long way to go in terms of getting civil rights. I mean, I said we got civil rights in 67, but what it actually did, we've been around 60,000 years. The white people sanctioned that we could be citizens. So I'll tell you a little bit about our dream time. There's a book out. One of the brothers came up and asked me, what do I think about this mutant ninja turtle, whatever you call it? And I'm quite horrified at what this white lady is saying, that she came to our country and got this spirit in her and walked miles and miles across the desert, and she's making millions of dollars over here. Can I tell you, even the traditional black people now don't walk across the hot sand anymore. They got 4-wheel drive. So if she had that power, I want to know where she got it from. And the area that she's actually talking about, where she said she's been to a lot of sacred sites, I mean, I find that absolutely unbelievable, because our healers, it is so difficult to get into our Aboriginal communities and find out from our... We still have traditional healers. I'm very fortunate to have some of this taught to me, and my brother-in-law is actually a traditional healer, not just reading out a book. He's had all of this passed down to him over 60,000 years. Now, for any outsider to come in and get our secrets about going back into the dream time, because especially if you're non-Indigenous, it is so difficult. And what our healers believe, if you start making money on the secrets of what we've been given by the spirits, you lose it, and things really bad come back on you. And so, for starters, a lot of our elders got together because still many of our elders are living out in the desert and in traditional areas, fortunately don't speak English, but the young people do, and they've been translating to a lot of the men and women of wisdom about this lady, because she's becoming a big star over here in your country, I believe, and not only a star, a millionaire or a billionaire. And people are very interested in Aboriginal Australia, because there are clans that are still very in tune with Mother Earth and the herbs, and very strong about our traditional healing and our dream time. And so I don't believe what that lady is saying is correct, and many of our elders got together and banned her book and said, if people want to be crazy enough around the world to listen to that lady and say that she walked right across the sand and flew somewhere because she was given the spirit, is just totally untrue. So I guess very briefly I can tell you that we have such a strong belief. I mean, we have separate women's and men's business. And the reason why I went into my Western nursing training is because I had known so much about our traditional healing practices, also about our women, which I can't talk too much about because we have the brothers here. But one thing I can say, that our strong belief with Mother Earth is that when we have our babies, because this has been written about, that no men are allowed to be around when the mother is in labour, and when the child is born, it's given the name where the totems is of that area. But the important things are that we didn't have doctors, Western doctors, that come in and deliver our babies. We had the mothers and the grandmothers that would deliver the baby, and ceremonies would be going on the whole time while the women are in labour. But during this time, the men have to go walkabout. They have to go away because childbirth is totally women's business, traditional content. And we have to go to the women's dreaming where the birthing centres are. And it's the placenta is so important because it nourishes not only the baby's life, it must go back to planet Earth, and to prepare for that child to go through the whole system of this mortal life and prepare that person to go back into the dream time where the placenta is nourishing that particular area, and that's where that same person must be buried in that area to prepare them to go back to the dream time. And life and death are very sacred to our people in terms of preparation to go back to our ancestors. I don't know how much of 60,000 years you want me to talk about, Brother, but a couple of questions. Okay.
Very brief questions.
How would the other black people view, let's say, those who visit the United States and others? How are they, what are they allowed to see? How are they treated? And what is...
Well, can I say that many black Australians don't get to travel.
I mean, those blacks coming there and viewing.
Oh, okay, I see. Well, I actually came over here I won a scholarship in 1975 to visit your American Indian reservations as well as Hawaii. I was lecturing there, and I met many of the black servicemen who told me, after they heard me lecture, that when they went to our country, they were told not to go anywhere near the black Australians, the Aboriginal people, that they were thieves, that they were dirty, and that they were no-hopers, and that they were lazy. And you see, my people have become so welfare dependent in terms of what's happened. And there are a lot of white people in our country making a lot of money to keep us oppressed. And it's just unbelievable because, as I said, 60% of our mob are in prison. So when the West Indians came to, the cricket team came to our country, it just so happened that I went and met the captain of the West Indies cricket team, and they were at this big white function, and I said, brother, this town where you're in has a 10 to 12% of a black population, and about 80% are unemployed, and they love meeting black people from overseas. And they've got this little barbecue put on with bread and butter and little sausages. I said, and you're here eating caviar and chicken. I'd really love you to come over and bring the brothers to meet poor black people. They actually came and cancelled their white function, you know. So it was just amazing, and they were shocked because when black people come to our country, they're kept away from the black Australians. And it just so happens that I was fortunate that my sister here, Marie Gray, from LA, her sister, who's a teacher, asked if she could come to Australia for exchange teaching. But they sent her to Melbourne where there's hardly any black people. Up in the north there's black people. So she actually came up and met with me, and that's how we've kept our contact. So black people in our country love meeting black people from all around the world if they get the opportunity.
What are your thoughts about the immunization part?
I didn't think I'd get that question. Look, when the question was, what do I think about immunisation of children? There's for and against. But I'm talking about communities in my country where black people are still carting water. They don't have running water. They have untreated raw sewage pouring out in their communities. 95% of some of these communities are on welfare, and one apple and one potato can cost $2 or $4. I mean, I'm talking about really, and our life expectancy before white people came were about 120 to 140 years. Our life expectancy today for Black Australia is 45 years. Okay? So when you're talking about immunisation, it depends what socio-economic conditions each individual clan's in. In America, if your lifestyle's different, you may be able to get away with not immunising your children because of a good diet. I'm talking about no clean running water. So immunisation may give our children an extra 2 years in life. So it's a very dicey question, but you understand where I'm coming from? The brother up the back there?
Yeah, the last question. I think based upon what the sister has said, for those of you may need to reconsider your response to the question, are white people inherently evil? There's a woman who's very prominent, an Australian woman by the name of Helen Caldicott. She's always running around the world talking about nuclear disarmament. I have yet to hear her address the issue of the Aboriginal Australians. What is your view of her?
Look, there are a lot of white people running around about nuclear disarmament, you know, and people are talking about sexism. I said, look, forget about sexism. We got to deal with racism, you know. We got to support the brothers because they've lost their dignity and their heritage. Yes, they are into alcohol and their drugs, and it's very difficult for us to support the brothers when they're beating up their wives. But as what the government's doing, they're bringing their Western values and trying to take them to a black community and give them Western preventative programs. I said, this is not working. We must empower our people by our own cultural appropriate programs. A lot of the nuclear disarmament, if they're fair income, why aren't they funding political black Australians to cruise around with them to tell it where it's at? Now, even though I'm well educated, my parents, we lived in the ghettos because we couldn't get a home. Most black people live in an area called the ghettos. My father used to burn wood and collect charcoal, and that's how I got my education on sheets of tin, because we couldn't afford pencils or paper. And my first typewriter came from the city trash. And I made it against all odds, and we used to cut water. Now, the nuclear disarmament people who are non-Indigenous or white know our plight. They'd have to be blind, deaf and dumb if they don't, because we've been having big demonstrations. I mean, black people don't care anymore in terms of, because we're so oppressed. And when Australia spent billions and billions of dollars on a birthday party in '88, we said, we're not celebrating this. Celebrate you raping our women, killing our kids, desecrating thousands and thousands of our graves. They actually used to get paid money. If they brought an Aboriginal body in with a bullet hole in it, they would get about $1. But if they brought a body in that didn't have any cracks in it, they'd get $2. So that's why they poisoned our people, waited till the burial, and then they took literally thousands of skeletons, and they stuffed our queen, Trujanini from Tasmania. They stuffed her and put her in a museum, and they tried to produce the theory of evolution. Now, our nuclear disarmament people have a lot of money, and we've got, and the recent research, I'll finish, brother, I know we're running out of time, they've just done some research on black Australia, third world countries, and white Australia, the health situation. Now, the research, I used to work for the World Health Organization. The research showed that people in developing countries and people that are white Australians, their health is actually improving. Black Australian health is deteriorating, that we have diseases that some third world countries have eradicated. So this is not a secret anymore. The nuclear disarmament people who says they want to stand with us, how many of you have met a black Australian before when you see all these whites from home coming and travelling the globe and talking about the real history of black Australia? So I want you, when you see them, to say, how about funding some, and if they say there's no political activists, every black person in my country is a political activist, okay? And the reason why I got my education is my dad said to me, girl, they can call you a dumb nigger, but when you get your education, they then can call you a bright nigger, and you have to keep getting an education and keep fighting for your rights. I think that's all, my brother. Thank you very much.
that was quite an introduction. She'll be speaking at least 2 other times this weekend. There'll be a program tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m. at 5300 South Vermont. Actually, myself and Sister Grace will be the major speakers. And then Sunday at 1 o'clock at Amarai African People's Church at 6825 South Crenshaw, she'll have the entire afternoon from 1 p.m. on. So we invite you to come. And we'll pose that question, Brother Asteno, to the sister herself. Are white people inherently evil? You got your answer. Now, what Asteno is talking about is an article that appeared in Image magazine about 1.5 years ago, and it deals with the issue of black-white relationships in India, Tasmania, and Australia. I brought about 25 of these, so we'll pass those around, and those of you who can get them, please do so, and we'll have some more on Sunday as well as bibliography. But we could go on and on and on. It's a very powerful issue, a very emotional issue to deal with that. But with that, we'll turn the program back over to Brother Jamal, who's largely responsible for organizing this, and then we'll see Dr. Delja. Oh, one more note. Go out and support our company. Thank you. Before we get started, let's just leave it up there. All right. We want to thank the Good Life for allowing us to have this program. And also Brother Jamal for organizing the program. I can tell you that I don't have any enthusiasm for this presentation tonight. And I guess it's the subject matter. Plus, a lot of things are going on. I leave for Egypt on Sunday afternoon. I haven't packed the thing. Ain't done nothing. I've been working on about 5 projects. And this, I don't know how many of these presentations we've done. We call this the Global African Community Lecture Series. And when I speak of the global African community, I'm really thinking of Africans outside the continent themselves. Can everybody hear me pretty well? No, yeah. Jamal, what's up, man? Make it loud. The first one was back on, I think, the 1st of February. I guess that's a little better, huh? And that was on the African presence in Asia. That I can really get into. Not just early Asia, but Asia in general. You know, you have a couple, 300 million black people in Asia today. And I was really nourished on this notion of Pan-Africanism from the time I was a young college student, so I like that. And then we did another one, which I believe was in March or April, on the African presence in early Europe, and that went well too. And then we did another one, a subject matter I really don't deal with very often. And I remember I came in here late, rushing, nervous as usual, even more than usual, not having reviewed any notes on the African presence in early America, and that turned out very, very, very well. But tonight's presentation is different from all of the above, and it is called Black Death Down Under. And it focuses primarily on the black people in the country today known as Australia, and to some extent Tasmania, and then to a lesser extent some of the islands in the Pacific, particularly in the part of the Pacific called Melanesia, or the Black Islands. Now this area is very different from the others. In ancient Asia, there's a challenge to show that black people were the first people in Asia, the Aborigines in Asia, and that they erected or influenced all the classical Asian high cultures, be they in India or Iraq or Iran and China, Japan, Southeast Asia, Turkey, Iraq, don't matter. Black people were there, and they left their fingerprint, they left their imprint, and they're still there today, especially in India. You know about the Black Untouchables. And Europe was good too, because we can show the influence that African people have had on Europe itself. Black people as the first Europeans. White folks, you might say, as almost illegitimate offspring of black people. Right? And then you show black people in Moor civilization, black people in Greece and Rome. And then in America, it's important to point that out too, because black people are the very first people in the Western Hemisphere. And then they influence directly and profoundly what we would call civilization over here. And all that's before the slave experience. And even the slave experience, we tried to look at again from the perspective of insurrection. The last time I was here, we did a presentation on black women. And it's always wonderful to talk about the glory and majesty of African women in ancient and modern times. We can all get behind that, I hope. Dr. Richard King was there that night, and Dr. Ando was there, and Haile Gerima came. So that was quite an evening. Everybody was there for President Jamal, all right? We're glad to have you back, though, brother. But you were wondering how we were doing in your absence, and we were rolling, okay? Because you set the tone for it. Tonight's presentation is vastly different. We do not have a historical tradition. There is no tradition in places like Australia of black people building great cities and monuments. There's no tradition in Tasmania and other parts of the Pacific of black people having a written language. But the challenge was to try to introduce us, or reintroduce us, to the black people in the Pacific and Australia, so-called African Americans, Africans in the West, to expand our concept of what an African is on a global scale. And that's not easy to do. And I consider myself first and foremost a historian. And I find it very exciting to weave together the threads of history that have been scattered, to weave it together like it's some sort of garment. But in Australia, that's very difficult to do. But that's what I'm going to try to do anyway. I'm going to try to do this in 3 parts, and then we can get out of here fairly early tonight. The first part, I want to introduce you to the black people in Australia and the South Pacific, the so-called Aborigines, the indigenous people of that part of the world, before the advent of white people. I do not want to start the history of I do not want to start the history of black people in that part of the world when a white man comes. That's incorrect. We are trained to do that anyway. In our history books, in school. In American history, you may have a chapter, so-called chapter on the Native Americans, Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Mayans, the Incas, and maybe not even a chapter. And shortly thereafter, the white man comes in. And then it's the rest of the book. See? I didn't want to do that, but that's how I got started with this. So let me begin, since I'm a little bit nervous, let me begin with that, how I became involved in this, introduce you to black folks in Australia, then talk about the Holocaust, the catastrophes, but I didn't want it to be just one long string of horrors and atrocities, although that has a certain amount of shock value. And then last but not least, how to leave here tonight without feeling really depressed and sad and embittered and wanting to go cut white folks' throat, which is legitimate, right? But I don't want to send you out here on that, because wild, reckless violence is ridiculous. All the anger, people used to ask me, Runoko, why are you involved in this? Long time ago when I was a college student, I used to say, because I hate white people. I didn't even know any white people, right? But I had a blind kind of rage in me. And it was the most difficult thing to try to channel that. We have had so many people who are martyrs. So many people out here all the time say, I'm ready to die for black people. We need some people to live for black people. See? And that's a vastly different thing. So what is it that we can take out of that experience that I'm going to talk about tonight that will inspire us, that gives us a sense of hope, and to reconfirm the idea that all those black folks in Australia and Tasmania, and the Solomon Islands, and New Guinea, and New Hebrides, and Vanuatu, and Hawaii, that they didn't die for nothing, or they didn't die in vain. That somehow or another our actions can be a monument, can be a testament to their bravery. That's what we want to do tonight. Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay. Now, it would not have been that difficult to not do this presentation tonight. Jamal will say he don't remember, but he was supposed to call me from KJLA this morning, and we were supposed to talk about this program. Good thing Brother Cliff mentioned it. Yeah, walk on out the door, man. One thing about tonight's program, too, I finally got a chance to meet the famous Charlie Blue. I've been hearing that brother every morning, and I've been feeling like I know him, right? And he's been coming to these presentations all the time. How does that brother get in every morning? I've been calling him, the line is busy, busy, busy. Charlie Blue is going to get through, right? Now, I didn't want to do this presentation. I said all week I was going to prepare, I was going to take notes, I was going to do this, I was going to do that. Didn't take a single note, except in my mind. And so this afternoon, I was pulling some things together. I'm not going to show a single slide. And out popped this photograph right here. I want everybody to take a look at that. Everybody see that real clear? Yeah. Do you know what this is? This is the last Tasmanian. And this is going to be on a calendar, on the front of a calendar on black men. That'll be coming out in September. And the thing that stands out to me about this photograph are her eyes. And you know, I sat this down right in front of me as I continued to prepare. And I said, man, as painful, as difficult, and effed up as this is to put yourself together for this lecture, your pain is much less than what this woman has suffered. Now, most of us don't know much about that. So those are some things that we're going to talk about tonight. Her name is Truganini, also called Lala Rook, and she's the last Tasmanian. So anyway, here we go. This came out, by the way, in Discover magazine. This is the front cover. Does anybody remember seeing this? A couple of years ago. This is Discover magazine. Oh, yeah. Good. All right. Now, here we go. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but we'll just see what happens. Maybe we'll have an excellent question and answer period. This, by the way, what I'm doing tonight, the primary texts are these two. This is a collection of about 4 articles. One is called The Final Solution Down Under, and another is called Tasmania, The Ultimate Solution, and the lead article is called The Angel of Black Death. And this is about a little bitty, probably very nice, old German lady, a fundamentalist Christian. And during the mid-1800s, she organized a ring of people in Australia that went around and stalked and hunted black people down, in some cases whole communities, to get their bones, to get their skulls, to get their penises. This is documented in a publication called Newsweek that is published in Australia, I think in 1991. Somebody got a copy of this from the Library of Congress and sent it to me. And it points out that in cities like Melbourne and Sydney, Australia, about 1860, one of the largest export industries was a thriving trade in the penises of black men. Yeah, it ain't no fun. This ain't like talking about the Egyptian dynasties. This takes some energy to talk about this. And also, the Global African Community, a pamphlet that I wrote and had published a couple of years ago, that deals with black people in Australia and the South Pacific. And one last piece. All of these are available, and this will be a little traveling money for Kemet. Wednesday, I'll have my 41st birthday, and I'll be in Nubia. I leave for Egypt on Sunday afternoon, and I'll be group leader for Dr. Ben. We have 65 people on tour. And this will be the third time I've been there in 4 years, so it'll be fabulous. This is a publication called A Primer of Facts Pertaining to the Ancient Greatness of African People. This is by Pauline Elizabeth Hopkins, and this is published in 1905. Now, Australia, as you can see here, is the world's smallest continent. The only continent that's smaller than Australia is Antarctica. Australia means the Great South Land, and it's derived from the word austral, which apparently is a Greek word, and the term austral just means south or southern. Black people began to inhabit Australia probably 60,000 years ago. That's a long, long time. Ultimately, they would have come out of Africa. They would have probably migrated very slowly out of Africa into Asia. And ultimately, they would have come right across here. And they would have sailed this little distance from the Asian mainland, what is now Indonesia, right over to Australia. That would have made them the first seafarers, the first people to travel the high seas. And they gradually began to go in and filter into this continent. And we know hardly nothing about that time period. 60,000 years is a mighty, mighty long time. What stands out to us most about black people in Australia is not just the skin complexion itself, but the hair texture and the color of the hair. Black people in Australia tend to have straight hair. In some cases, the hair is blonde and red, particularly among children. And there's no evidence of racial intermingling. I think what happened is that black folks went to Australia a long time ago and basically got isolated. Now, a lot of folks will call them primitive, but the word primitive is actually just based on the word prime. One thing we know about them, and probably the other black people that went to this part of the world even before them, is that although they have a short lifestyle, a short lifespan, and they are regarded as primitive by most people, among them there's almost no murder rate. Rape is almost unheard of. There's almost no such thing as theft. And perhaps the most remarkable and profound thing about them is the relationship that they have with their environment. They live in almost total harmony with nature. Now, that existence spans, as I say, perhaps 60,000 years. And some people probably know about a concept that they deal with called the dreaming or the dream time. And perhaps that is how they recall their history. And let me tell you how I got turned on to this to some extent. I was going to Cal State Northridge, and I recall being on a bus one afternoon. And I came across an article in the Los Angeles Times about massacres in Australia. And it was pointing out that when Europeans came to Australia on January 1st, 1788, they established as a British prison colony. And they took the worst of their convicts, their prisoners, out of English penitentiaries and brought them to Australia in January 1788, and then Tasmania in May 1802, and also New Zealand and some parts of the United States. I believe Georgia was a British prison colony. There's an excellent book that documents it called The Fatal Shore, and I would highly recommend. Now, in this particular article, they talked about things that I'd never heard of before. They pointed out how, for example, bounties were offered for the scalps of black people. You know, white folks are the ones who introduced scalping. Now, Native Americans didn't have nothing to do with that. And that they were given a 5-pound bounty for every scalp that they produced. And that more than that, there was a case where black people would be herded together and run off or stampeded off cliffs. And that's the first time I heard about the black presence in Australia. Now, I was fascinated by, but the country that I was most interested in was India. And I continued to pursue that. But in 1985, I did a presentation on KPFK. And it was on the black presence in Australia, Hawaii, etc. I mentioned LeGrand Clegg's work. And I gave my phone number out. And sometimes strange things happen when you do that. So this guy started to call me. And this is about 1985, right? And then he started to, first he started to write me. And then he started to send me books. And then he started to call me. And then he started to send me money. And I'd never met this person. Maybe he liked the sound of my voice, I don't know. So he started sending me all these rare books on Australia, books I never heard of before. Books like The Last of the Tasmanians. There's a book called Black War, The Destruction of the Tasmanians. And two excellent books. This is called Race Relations in Colonial Queensland. Now, I never met this guy, but for 10 years he sent me all these valuable books, and it took about 10 years for me to want to do a presentation on the subject. Now, from the time Europeans began to settle in Australia, the fate of these black people was sealed. So what I want to do is read a couple passages from this particular book. It's an excellent book, and it just talks about Australia and European relationships. It says, for example, these are just descriptions. Vengeance was now the cry. Apparently, some black women have been raped by two white shepherds, and these black people in Australia killed the two white shepherds. So a mob of white folks got together and decided on an act of retribution. This is what happened. It says, vengeance was now the cry, and having hurriedly buried their bodies, the whole party started in pursuit of the murderers. Toward the evening of the second day, a large mob of some 50 or 60 blacks was discovered camped around a deep water hole at the foot of the camp ranges. The party, numbering about 25, spread out and undercover formed a complete circle around the devoted mob. At a given signal, they closed in at a gallop with rifles and revolvers ready. The dismay among the mob was frightful. Whichever way they turned, they were met by mounted men armed to the teeth. Some few who tried to run the gauntlet were one shot down. The rest took to the water. Not one escaped to tell the tale. And this was commonplace. Here's a guy who says, I have seen two large pits covered with branches and brush and secured by a few stones. And the pits themselves were full of dead black fellows of all ages and sexes. On another occasion, I was traveling on a road where for more than a quarter of a mile, the air was tainted with the putrefaction of corpses which lay all along the ridges just as they had fallen. It is true that the offense here was the murder of 5 shepherds on one station in a week, but such wholesale and indiscriminate vengeance seems rather disproportionate, to say the least. Another common practice that Europeans engaged in Australia was to poison black people. Now, after they had more or less conquered the blacks, after wars of resistance, and the blacks developed a degree of dependency upon them. You know what I'm talking about? All they have to do to get rid of us, I guess, is poison Burger King or something like that, right? And all of us would be gone. Kentucky Fried. Well, that's what they would do to the black people here in Australia. They would simply put strychnine in their food, and whole groups of them would be murdered. And then after that, they begin to develop a stereotype of black people. Let me just read some of these passages here. The rations contained as much strychnine as anything else, and not one of the mob escaped. When they awoke in the morning, they were all dead corpses. More than 100 blacks were stressed out by this ruse of the owner of the Long Lagoon. And they would kill men, women, and children without any concern for their well-being. Let's see, what else do we have here? Now, this is something deep, too, and this is something I guess that needs to be looked at. I had an opportunity to spend some time with Dr. Clark last Saturday. We had brunch, and I had a chance to talk to him privately for almost an hour. And I'm working on a research project, too. I've been telling you about it on Otabenga, the pygmy in the zoo, which is very dreary, right? And one of the things, though, that is most disturbing is that this man, Otabenga, and this ties into this, is the so-called Congolese pygmy, a Batwa. And the Congo, now known as Zaire, was the private property of King Leopold of Belgium. From about 1865 to about 1885, it was his private property. And very few people know what happened there, but almost a complete case of genocide. It is estimated that around 1865, there were 20 million black people in Zaire. By 1885, there were only 10 million. There was an army of Belgians, but there were only about 300 Belgian officers. Almost all the soldiers in the army, like 11,000 men, were black. And those are the ones who did most of the killing. It's the same thing in Australia. You have what are called the Australian Native Mounted Police. And these were black folks who were used to track down and murder most of the other black folks there. That's the chapter in the book. The next chapter deals with the victimization of what are called the remnants. Now, it documents the fact that of the black people that came to live around the settlements, almost all of them were infected with venereal diseases. Children as young as 3 years old. So that's an issue. Now, by 1850 or so, the black populations of Australia, which may have been as much as 3 million people, by January 1st, 1788, have been reduced to about 25,000 people. And it was illegal in most of Australia, particularly Queensland, which is right over here, for black people to wear shoes. I have one article down here that a sister who's going to Australia sent to me. She points out in this article that during much of the 1800s, black children were taken away from adult black people because it was not thought that they were responsible enough to raise a family. So they were taken away from them and placed in white missions. And that's another issue. In parts of Australia in the 1900s, the book goes on to document that many black people were not only shot to death for use as dog food, but that in the bush, black people were commonly used for target practice. If a white person got a new gun, then the first thing they would do is go into the bush and just shoot any black person as a form of target practice. Now, this is a time of social Darwinism, and this is a time when Anglo-Saxons have basically conquered the Western world, and they apparently viewed it as their civilizing mission to kill black people in Australia as long as they perceived them as a threat, and when they no longer perceived them as a threat, it was their duty to Christianize them. As recently as 1960, black people in Australia were not counted as part of the census. They were not accorded the right to vote in federal elections. As recently as 1967, black people in Australia were not allowed they were not given a legal right to consume alcoholic beverages. Now, these are the people that we traditionally call Aborigines. The term Aborigine just means native or indigenous. These black people call themselves Koori, K-O-O-R-I. And today there are only about 100,000 of them left. Now you wonder why we bother to talk about that. As many problems as black people have right here in the United States, because we're talking about a global community. And we're also trying to look at our experience with white people around the world. Our experience over here, in Canada, and the Caribbean, there seems to be no exception to that. There is a resistance movement in Australia. In August 1972, for example, a Black Panther Party was established in Brisbane, Australia. In the 1970s, a number of black people in Australia were influenced by the so-called Black Power movement. And they looked directly to us for a lot of inspiration. Now, as bad as Australia has been, maybe the black people in Australia could even consider themselves fortunate in some ways. Because off the southeast coast of Australia lies the little landmass, lies the island of Tasmania. And in Tasmania, all the black people were wiped out. Every last one. Every last man, woman, and child. Tasmania is named after a Dutchman named Abel Tasman. And the Dutch came to Tasmania in 1652. Black people have probably been there for perhaps 20,000 years. And they lived in relative isolation. Tasmania is a small island off the southeast coast of Australia, about the size of Ireland, or it's about the size of West Virginia in terms of its land mass. Black people probably populated the place 12,000 years ago, and there may have been 100,000 of them. They lived in almost total isolation. And their level of material culture is about as bare as you will see. There's no evidence of agriculture. There's no evidence of farming. There's no evidence of animal domestication. I don't know if they've found a bow and arrow. Nobody has found a fish hook. And it would seem as though the isolation had developed to the extent that they had even lost knowledge of the domestication of fire. But they seem to be getting along pretty well. In May 1802, Australia, I should say Tasmania, was established as a British prison colony. By 1876, all of the black people of Tasmania were dead. Now, the heavy thing to me is, this is their own land. Right? It's not like they went out and conquered other people's lands. Europeans decided that they had a divine right to these possessions, and they literally wiped these black people out. Now, there was strong resistance, but these black people were not prepared to deal with this European onslaught. They had never encountered anything like Europeans before. They offered them their land. They showed them how to survive in Tasmania. This was beginning in 1802. Now, about 1820, the European colonial administration in Tasmania decided that the blacks were a nuisance and a bother, and they would wipe them out. So they engaged in what was called the Black War. And within a period of about 11 years, there were 75 black people left in all of Tasmania. 75. And they took them to a place called Oyster Cove, and then another place called Flinders Island. And these were the world's first concentration camps in Tasmania. Everybody's heard about the Tasmanian devil in the cartoons. There's a real Tasmanian devil, and he's got nothing whatsoever to do with cartoons. Now, let me just read a little bit about Tasmania, and then I think I'm going to open it up for a Q&A session. Let's see. Now, let me just quote some of this. Now, William Laney, facetiously known as King Billy, was the last full-blooded male Tasmanian. He grew up on Flinders Island, Tasmania, until the age of 13, when he was removed with a remnant of his people to a concentration camp called Oyster Grove. Ultimately, he became a sailor and at times went whaling. With a steady decrease in the number of blacks, the white people in Tasmania began to take an interest in Laney. In January 1868, he was introduced to Prince Alfred. He returned ill from a whaling voyage in February 1869. And on March 2nd, 1869, he died in his room at a place called the Dog and Partridge Public House. On March 6th, the day of the funeral, about 50 or 60 residents interested in Laney and determined that he should at least have a fine burial assembled at the hospital. Rumors were circulating that the body had been mutilated, and to satisfy the mourners, the coffin was opened. Now, why would that be happening? It's because these folks, at the time, people were beginning to speculate if they were in fact a missing link, and they were somehow subhuman. And so they became a great interest in death. And in most cases, shortly after a person had been killed, his head might be cut off, feet might be cut off, and the body used for scientific experimentation. So this rumor began to circulate. It says that When those who wished to do so had seen the body, the coffin was closed and sealed. Meanwhile, it was reported that on the preceding night, a surgeon had entered the dead house where Laney lay, skinned the head, and removed the skull. The head of a patient who had died in the hospital on the same day was similarly skinned, and the skull was placed inside Laney's scalp and the skin drawn over it. In keeping with the tradition, no one was punished. William Laney, the last black man in Tasmania, was gone. In May 1876, Truganini passed away. Now, this is Truganini. Now, take a look at that. Let me read something about the life of Truganini. And this is not a typical nice, smooth lecture. Now, in May 1876, Truganini, the last full-blood Tasmanian, died at 73 years of age. Her mother had been stabbed to death by a European. Her uncle had been shot by a European. Her sisters were kidnapped by Europeans. Her intended husband was drowned by 2 Europeans in her presence while his murderers raped her. It might be accurately said that Truganini's numerous personal sufferings typify the Tasmanian people as a whole. Truganini's life spanned to the year of beginning of the association between Europeans and Tasmanians. During this period, the Tasmanians were humiliated, degraded, and eventually exterminated. "Don't let them cut me up," she begged the doctor as she lay dying. And they didn't cut her up. After her burial, Truganini's body was exhumed, and her skeleton strung up on wires and placed upright in a box became for many years the most popular exhibit in the Tasmanian Museum and remained on display until 1947. Let me read that again. "Don't let them cut me up," she begged the doctor as she lay dying. After her burial, Truganini's body was exhumed, and her skeleton strung up on wires and placed upright in a box became for many years the most popular exhibit in the Tasmanian Museum and remained on display until 1947. Finally, in 1976, the centenary year of Truganini's death, despite the museum's objections, her skeleton was cremated and her ashes scattered to sea. Now that's the Holocaust. But how come that's never on the news? Before I left tonight to come to the Good Life, there was a program on the Jews and the Holocaust. You know, I don't blame them for projecting their history and creating a sense of compassion so that they can do anything they want to the Palestinians and to us too, for that matter. I blame us for not taking our history and making it known to the world. No one has suffered the degrees of Holocaust that African people have suffered. And this is just in one part of the world. Now, in New Guinea, there was slavery practiced. In many of the islands of the South Pacific, which we see in Mutiny of the Bounty, black people were wiped out in wholesale. In Hawaii during the 1850s, I think there's only about 3 recordings of births in Hawaii. There were hardly no children born during that period of time. And this is also during the heyday of the slave trade in Africa. We know about the slave experience, so we're not going to talk about that tonight. But many people are not aware of what happened after the slave experience. And not just the slave experience. For example, white folks came to South Africa in 1652. That's the same year that Daniel Tasman touched bases in Australia. And you have similar groups of black people in South Africa, so-called Bushmen and Hottentots, Khoisan. And they were also wiped out during that same period of time. Now, let me just touch bases a little bit, because I see it's very quiet in here tonight. It's very gloomy, and it's understandable. But these are things that need to be known. All our history is not pretty. All of it's not glorious. but some of it just needs to be confronted in terms of stark reality. Now, you also have black folks all over the South Pacific today. And what is their status? The world's second largest island, second only after Greenland, is New Guinea. New Guinea is right over here. It's divided into two halves. One half is called Irian Jaya. That's the western half. And the other half is called Papua New Guinea. Everybody has heard of Papua New Guinea. The term Papua is spelled P-A-P-U-A. That is the word given to them by the Malaysians, and it means kinky hair. And over a period of time, the word came to be synonymous with slave, because Asians, Mongoloid types, from China in particular, will go to Melanesia and use it as a slave trading quarters, just like Europeans in Africa. One of the things, too, that is very important to understand as we examine this global African community is what our relationship has been, not only with white people, but with other non-African people around the world. And see, it's my contention that we have suffered as much on the hands of Far East Asians and Mongoloids as white folks. It's just a story that has not been told. Chancellor Williams tells us that at one time, there were enough people in China powerful enough to establish the Kingdom of Rome. Now, where are they today? Those questions have to be asked in terms of the South Pacific. Around, I guess, about 1800, Europeans also began to come to the South Pacific, and these islands were rapidly decimated. New Guinea has tremendous mineral resources, and so about 1965, it was invaded by Indonesia, and the western half of the island has been occupied ever since then. And wholesale genocide is going on there right today. You have Indonesians who look like Japanese or Chinese who are dropping napalm on black people in that part of the world. America made napalm right now today. And they have an African liberation group there that is based in West Africa. And the same thing holds true for other parts of Melanesia. One of the big issues that you've been hearing about in the news is nuclear testing in the South Pacific. Those are mostly black people there. The French are testing nuclear devices in an island called New Caledonia. That's an island dominated by black people called the Kanaks. They do not call themselves Melanesians. That's the Greek word. They call themselves Kanaks, K-A-N-A-K-S. It just means the people. And they are a minority now. They're struggling for independence. And that is the case with black populations throughout the South Pacific. Now, I'm not an expert on Australia or the South Pacific at all. I'm not an expert on anything. I'm just an interested student. And I'm just fascinated by the global dispersions of African people around the world. Brothers and sisters, I believe that that in and of itself is significant. That we can begin to look at ourselves as a global people. We can begin to throw away this notion of black people as a helpless minority. Black people are the most powerful people on earth if we would just take our power in our hands. We have the ability to liberate ourselves. Nobody's going to do that for us. And I'm pissed off about affirmative action. I'm mad about Pete Wilson. I'm mad about all these things Europeans are doing, but you know what? It just speaks to the fact that African people can't look to anybody to help us. We have to do it ourselves. That's one of the reasons these programs of The Good Life are wonderful, because we do it in a black business establishment, in a black community, around other black people. Liberation is going to come from our community. It's not going to come from college campuses, and it's not going to come from white suburbs, right? That's what all these lessons tell us. Now, there's a growing consciousness among these people that they too are part of a global African community. For example, in Fiji, there's a tradition that black people sailed there directly from West Africa about 50,000 years ago. Not West Africa, but from East Africa. First, they say they came from Egypt. Everybody wants to identify with Egypt. And then they say they went to a place called Tanganyika, or Tanzania, and sailed from there. You have black people that I know personally who are living in the South Pacific now who are doing some kind of research and trying to document it and put all our history together. Now, brothers and sisters, black people here have been almost wiped out. Their story is very much like Native American today. But there are some who are alive to tell the story. Black people in Tasmania have been wiped out completely. There's nobody to tell their story but us. And the same thing for many black people in the South Pacific. I think And I say all the time, and I guess I'll conclude with this, that with knowledge comes a sense of responsibility. As much as we suffer today, and as difficult as the conditions that we live in today are, I think that we can take a degree of inspiration from what happened to our ancestors in various parts of the world. We have to be able to say that we are going to avenge what happened to them, that they lived and died for us, that it's easy to give up. It's easy to join the other side. It's easy to say, I'm through with black people. And some of us have said that and come back. And some of us have said it and haven't come back. We have to be able to say that the black people in the South Pacific, the black people that died on those slave ships, their lives meant something. And we have to take up that banner. We have to be able to look at ourselves and say that they did not die in vain. We're here to speak on their behalf. We're here to learn from their experience. And we're here to move forward. As difficult as things are, if we can survive the slave trade, if we can survive the Holocaust that affected black people in Australia and the South Pacific, we ought to be able to do anything. Hotep, brothers and sisters. How is it that we can stand tall again in a community of nations? Because that's what I really care about. Individuals really don't mean that much to me. Right? I mean, that's great. But I'm talking about a community, a nation of African people, who cannot be humiliated, who are powerful, who understand who they are. How can we again achieve that position without, in the process, becoming like these people who have their foot on our neck? Does that make any sense at all? Because, see, I don't want to be like Europeans. I don't want to be a black Anglo-Saxon. I want to be an African man. That's what I am, a proud African man. But how is it that we can liberate ourselves without taking on the same characteristics as the people we're trying to liberate ourselves from? Brother.
I don't know if I have an answer to that. I think a lot of it has to do with, I don't think that we have taken very seriously the spiritual consequences. See, I think the white people...
What do you mean by that, spiritual consequence?
There is a spiritual reality that I think we as African people are much more in tune than European people are. And that there are spiritual consequences that white people are going to have to pay. I don't know what people's different spiritual belief systems are, but I believe that there's a spiritual consequence white people are going to have to pay. And if we adopt their mentality and do the same things to other people that they've done to us, then we are going to have those same spiritual consequences. Now, there is a book, it's called Mutant Message Down Under. And it's about...
Is that a recent book?
Yeah.
I think you were telling me about that.
It's about this white woman who was living, she's from the United States, went to Australia to live. And while she was there, she was a doctor, I believe, and she got involved with the Aboriginal youth who had come to live in the urban environment and kind of got involved in antisocial behavior. And as a reward, the people who live, these people call themselves the real people. Those the indigenous people who are living in their traditional life, their traditional belief systems, and wanted to honor this woman. So she thought she was going to some kind of luncheon or something. They brought her out to the outback, and they took her on what's called a walkabout and a spiritual journey. And their reason for taking her on that journey was to show her the spirituality of these people. I mean, while she was with them, she discovered that these people had telepathic powers. They were communicating with one another without speaking. They were like you said, they were in such in tune with nature that the first thing they would do, they carried no supplies with them. They carried enough water that they needed. But the first thing they would do in the morning would be to gather around in a circle and pray to the God that they would be able to find whatever nourishment that they needed for that day. And they always would. And whenever they would kill an animal, they would make sure that they utilized every part of the animal and did not waste it and returned it back to the environment. And they felt then that it was there. When it came time for them to die, they would simply go out into the middle of the wilderness and die, and they felt that they were giving themselves back to the environment. So they're living in a totally different spiritual level. And what they were trying to get this woman to realize is that there is a spiritual dimension to things, and that I think really the ultimate message is that they have some spiritual consequences to pay for everything that they've done. that's where...
I sure would like to see him pay, man. See? And I don't hate white folks. Believe me, I don't think about them very often. I don't. You know why? Because to me, hate is a real deep passion and emotion. And it takes up a lot of energy. And I think that, just like I feel about the Jews, my opinion is F the Jews. You know, we give them so much attention. I think we've had the discussion many times. As a brother, I said, you know, why do y'all give so much attention to the Jews? Because they give so much attention to us. But, and maybe I'm being naive about it, but I just think we need to just work on black people. Yeah, I guess you're right. And here's another question. We are, and believe me, just bear with me for a moment. I believe we're far more spiritual people than Europeans. I don't know if Europeans can be said to be spiritual. But I also have the question, and I'm just going to, you know, let it go. What good has it gotten us so far? Does that allow us to, does that equip us to deal with them? People who have no spiritual essence. You understand what I'm saying?
I don't think the story's over. I think we're kind of at the end of the chapter. And we're getting ready to, they are getting ready to have that spiritual consequence realized upon them.
Hey, man, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you come up here and fill the questions, and I'll try to answer them. Come on, okay? Everybody knows, brother, I stand up. All right, you pick the questions.
I don't know if I can. Okay, well, I'll just do it like this. All right, Hotep, everybody. Okay. Sister Malika.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has said that the Europeans came forth out of us. We made, as you probably heard read, that we made this European to show us what was in us, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has said it before. And when I too have been baffled by the fact that we have not all gone stark raving mad with everything from butcher knives to border damage to whatever you can think of, and going all on Caucasian people. However, I'm going to say, echo what the brother said, we are on a different spiritual plane. So understanding that since they were set here in the earth, was made by us to show us something that was missing or lacking within ourselves, all of this whole process is to bring us back to our Creator, to take us back to the essence of who we are. We are extensions of the divine Creator, God, Allah, on this planet. And what it says to us, the fact that we can take this pain, because I tell you, I heard David, oh God, I don't get a moment of rest. I think you all know that. And yet I keep right on giving and keep right on moving forward. And I suggest that we continue. That is the essence of it, is that we are on a journey moving back towards our divine self. We are greater than this. So the thing that I set forth is that we, one, stop talking to Europeans so much, so all they do is take our brains and take information from us and use it against us. Two, we stop this. I'm serious. Stop talking to them and then stop pressing your hair and imitating and mimicking them. The greatest compliment you can pay another person is to imitate them. Right. So we're running around here flattering white folks. And they get real upset with me because every now and then I come down so hard. Oh, good Lord. I tell you I have to say what's in my heart. And I'm saying to you that take these dear curls out of your hair, get yourself in order, because you are on a spiritual journey to take you back to your divine self. And don't let this Caucasian tell you that you've got to look like, act like, think like, etc., like him, because it's preventing you from getting back to your divine self. I thank you.
Okay, and you know, one other thing, you know, most African spiritual belief systems believe in the concept of reincarnation. Really, there is no such thing as death.
All right, let me say something. Now, you know, one thing disturbs me a lot, and I've been thinking about this lately. It really dawned on me when I was in India, and I was with some of the leadership of the Untouchables, and they have an expression. They say, and this, in many ways it could be applied to black people over here. They said that Dalits, what they call the Untouchables, don't want to learn anything new or forget anything old. And wherever I went in India, I would really try to talk to people, and I would say, I'd ask them the question, you know, this notion of untouchability says that you are foul and loathsome things. Do you really believe that? And you know, most of them answered in the affirmative. And I think that that is what a lot of black folks believe here too. That the way things are now, in terms of race relationships, is the natural order of things. That white people are supposed to be on top of us. That this is the way it is. Otherwise, why would they have conquered us? That's one of the most powerful things that I think we have to challenge. The natural order of things. And that's one of the reasons history is important, because it shows that things ain't always been the way they are now.
Any other questions?
Or comments?
We have organizations in the world like Greenpeace. We have the human organizations that started and said they bring in the most possible. And even if they have to go with human rights or even that, they study it as an organization. When is it that we're going to start realizing that we have a responsibility globally, and that it doesn't take going to IMAG and spending money. It takes putting the money where we know it's going to bring the greatest good. That's right. And it's like gaining.
Well, since I'm here, you know, the Maoris have had an issue for hundreds of years, and we've all had major problems with the dominant culture. I should say the oppressive culture. And I listen and I say, when are we going to realize that if Greenpeace is in the South Pacific trying to stop the French from doing the nuclear bombing and testing, how is it that we can get together and protect our people on Johnston Island, on the Samoas, and wherever else they are, when we're buying cars, we're buying booze, we're partying, we're buying cigarettes, and it's $10 a carton or more, you know? And that's money that we can say, this is my sacrifice for my people, and put it away. You say, where am I going to send it? Let's start something. You know, it's time. Renoka gets up here, he tells us all of this, and we say, when are we going to make the move? I'm ready to make a move. And it's not about a local thing, because once we get ourselves together spiritually and we understand that we're all connected, we're going to start reaching out, and it's all going to come back to us, because that's the way manifestation works. That's the act of generosity. And so you don't have to worry about, I'm here, I have to do for me, I have to do for my people here, because it's all one. So, same.
Brother.
I just wanted to say that I feel I enjoyed yesterday. I feel that the people, as the rest of the people, that we are engaged in the war. We are engaged in the struggle. We have to prove ourselves being engaged in it. I feel like right now, with us and us other people over here, we went through about 30 years whereby we thought that our struggle was a struggle for integration. Us trying to get a job, good job for white people. What I feel right now, we need to understand, especially with more historical survey, that everywhere we're particularly the types on the earth, there is an activity by European types to depopulate us. The people by the destruction of our water supply system, of our food supply system in Ethiopia and other places, or through the disease, really through the AIDS virus, the Ebola. Either one of these are supposed to be racially motivated, yet they've been hitting the heaviest pigmented populations of the most. You know, and then also we've been getting hit with biological and chemical warfare, like such as alcohol and drugs, different other things. Absolutely. But if we're clear and we look at what's taking place, we can understand that all over the world we're one race of people, that there is an attempt by other race, by the white race, in order to repopulate us, and this will basically slowly take us off of the planet. But once we become aware of that, there won't be no problem for us to stop. So that we need to have this kind of information in order to give us the kind of tools we need to understand that we have to move as a race of people, that our struggle is a race struggle, and no other kind of struggle.
Let me make a comment too. You know, one issue that we really don't deal with very much, and I heard some, you know, Jamal had an opportunity to travel a little while ago, and I'm glad for him. I really have a lot of respect for this brother, both these brothers. I've seen them for a while, and I've seen how consistent they are. State is trying to get to Namibia, and Jamal says he wants to go to Haiti over the next few months. Now, I'm going to Egypt Sunday, and I go to Costa Rica, a place I've never been. Asa Hilliard and I are going to speak at an international conference there at the end of this month. And, travel is a wonderful thing because you get a chance to interact with African people all over the world. Last time I was in Europe, I was in France, and I lectured to some people in Paris. And I asked them, whenever I get an opportunity, I like to ask more questions than answer, right? I'm trying to learn as much as anything. And I said, what do you think are the major things confronting black people in the world today? And I would have expected them to say AIDS, because a lot of them are from countries in Africa, with heavy AIDS things. They say no. And they say the biggest issue that they see are the dumping of toxic waste in Africa. That's another major thing right there, too. Remember a few years ago, there was this barge floating up and down the East Coast, and they wouldn't, you know where that went? It went to Africa. That's another issue. Brother? Come on up, Jelani, so we can hear you, man. Please.
That light never seems to go out once you're aware of yourself, of your history, and then also about Mother, so navigate ourselves to mental slavery done with ourselves in our mind. That's that determination drive that keeps going. And that spirituality does not need to be passive. As you see that Shante Moore, Zulu, and even in the room, so-called room, that once you're aware of yourself, you can see fight. And that taking of life is not necessarily wrong, but it's right when you use the correct reason. So one thing that our struggle has been to point on is not just the artist part. I say it's more than home. We have to get the science and technology. It's fuse our spirituality. So they really take our knowledge and use it for their end. So that's where we have to go. Not just with the following the literature, we need that. We need that thought. We also need to on the material level, not as far as machines and medicine, but as far as creating a sign, a new sign, like Pranam said. If we want to make ourselves more zero, then we should start right now. If we want to create a new humanity, then we go forward. Different concepts are different concepts as well. And we don't need to be passive to be spiritual. I think that's what we have. That, to be spiritual means just to meditate on things around rather than actively involved and out. You can start now. It's already been done. The step has already been made. The first action said no, I'm not going to be today. And the first action said yes, you're going to fight. Like the grandfather said, take the story.
Is what we do. If we're sitting here every Friday talking about what we're going to do, that's why we got up and did the bumper stickers. I said, listen, you all, we have to do something. They are not listening when you're talking. Writing letters, they end up in file 13. They laugh, they look at them, and they throw it, they discard it. It means nothing. It is what you do. That is your culture. Now, you all know Neely Fuller, and I love me some Neely Fuller. I want to let you know. I'm saying that in order to fight this racism that is set forth here by these people, you have got to get up and do something. It's not about talking it. It's about doing it. And that is your culture. What you are doing, they are busy practicing their culture, which is racism. That's it. I'm serious. That is their religion. They get up, they teach their children racism, they teach them how to come in and assault your psyche when they walk in a room. These people are teaching this thing to their children. What I'm saying is we have got to begin changing our behaviors and doing something, not talking it.
Okay, John. Yeah, John has you.
Come on, John, give us a succinct question for a change.
Yes, brother.
Okay. I'd like to see, I'd like to give you a question to focus for some time on the materiality of white people. I'm looking at
What do you mean by that, materiality?
well, that's sort of Francis West Welsing last Wednesday said a few sentences about the white people want to reduce black people to the level of childhood. You know, they want you to be a clown, somebody that they can laugh at, or a child, a childish, or in some way immature. If you look at, I look at Neely Fuller talking about the different aspects of racism, but if you look at in African music that white people don't approach. You know, like I'm thinking about Garcia. You know, this guy that just died. And if you listen to that, you know, I mean, I tried to get into it to see what they saw.
Just to relate, huh? What are they talking about?
Yeah. I didn't see there was, you know, there was. I mean, I don't want to put the man down, and even you know, I was one of his closest friends who said that, you know, he didn't understand it at first, you know. But I'm just saying that if you know, and then I was listening to these the white people knocking Michael Jackson today, and you know, and I started to call in and tell them about, you know, Michael Jackson is a figment of Colonel Parker's, I mean, you know, of white people's imagination and their creation, just like Elvis Presley is Colonel Parker's creation of his figment of imagination. But I'm just saying that with this thing of you know, just like you were talking, you know, you're talking about black children in Queensland, where if they're being taken away, well, New Cambridge wants to do the same thing. It seems to be the parallels are there, and I think that, you know, white people have to be to some degree approached on the level of materiality. They have to be understood on the level of materiality. You know, I think if it means that they're physically immature, you know, to some degree, I mean, you know, there's human nature, but I think that ought to be understood, it ought to be analyzed and approached. I think, you know, that's close as I can get to the question.
All right. Okay, one more question. This is what it is.
Comments about racism. We all got to realize race itself is a creation. Because there's only one race, human race. And for economic problems and racial problems, for example, Tasmania, the reason other people kill was for natural resources of land and bottom land was killed for money. And I think race is that aspect. Where money is caused about whereas, you know, anything else. Control of economic hours
Well, brother, I agree with you partially. I think it's race and class. I think it's economic and color. I think that the two go hand in hand. Now, when you have both those factors, you know, it's deep trouble. You don't see white folks doing anything to help those other white people hardly in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it's not just a racial thing, but race definitely plays a part too. I don't think you can rule that out. Well, Jamal, what's that?
Yeah.
At the time that you were talking, it was a Darwinian theory that was promoted, and that's why you were defined, and that's what they were going on. You know, it is a thinking that they discerned as inferior. At that point, it was an ignorance and spirit and because they were criminals. And they just let their tendency out.
Brother, I'm going to let you say something, but let me just quote a couple more things from this book, and then Brother Roland Freeman wants to make an announcement. And I also want to point out that Steve Coakley is going to be in Amarai African People's Community Church Sunday at 1. And this typified what the sister's talking about. This is from a guy named C.H. Allen. I assume it's the guy. And this is a book called A Visit to Queensland, and this was published in 1870. He says, of all the wild men of the earth, the Australian savage is one of the most degraded and uninteresting, living in a state only just removed from the beast of the forest. In some cases, these people believe that it was their duty and it was their destiny to wipe people out, to wipe black people out. Now, you don't really see a history. Well, anyway, I'm sorry.
there's no white people in Europe that were enslaved. And so in order to make it seem candy coated or seem acceptable, they have to reduce black people to animals more or less.
Yeah.
To make it more acceptable.
Well,
Bottom line, what I'm saying is this is all creation. The people that were told at the time, and bottom line was economic.
well, let me just say this, and then if I Steno wants to make some comments, we can close it out. I'll be gone for about a month. Like I said, I go to Kemet, and then I go to Costa Rica, and I have a new book coming out at the end of September. So I know I want to be at the Good Life a number of times to talk about all of those things. I think what we're doing is talking and defining and trying to come to grips with some realities. And that's not going to happen in 2 hours on a Friday night. I think the input that everyone had has been valuable because we are trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And maybe that in and of itself is a monument. Because, you know, for all intents and purposes, black people should have been wiped out, all the things we suffered. We are very strong people. And we are very spiritual people. And it's perhaps that spiritual spark that has never been extinguished that has allowed us to survive and hopefully learn and internalize this so we can move forward. It's been said that intellectuals are to study the past, not for the mere pleasure they find in so doing, but to derive lessons from it. Brothers and sisters, Shem Hotep.
Okay. Okay, Runoko has some books and some
Whatever we call ourselves, we're going to share that destiny. But anyway, tomorrow we're going to have the 6th annual Marcus Garvey Day Festival and Parade. The parade is going to start right here at Rodeo Road. It's going to go down Crenshaw to Adams and then up Adams to Arlington, where to conclude at the Elegant Manor. We're going to open the festivities when the parade concludes. We're going to have we're going to have a lot of people. It's on the flyers. They're going to pass the flyer, make sure everybody get it. It's going to be a great time. We want you, especially the conscious community, to be there and to honor Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey is one of our black leaders that deserves to be honored. He deserves to be put on a high pedestal. He lived, fought his life for the uplift of his people. He died a poor man, still fighting for his people. He suffered all the arrows and slings of not only America, but the Europeans, the Germans, the British, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch. They all tried to destroy his movement. Black people have not been that unified since then, so we think there's a very valuable lesson to be learned. You know, Garvey said the greatest weapon used against the Negro is disorganization, and you really think and analyze and break that down, and we can save a lot of talk, because the greatest weapon used against the Negro is disorganization. And whether we want to be, whatever we want to be, we are considered Negroes, black, Africans, African Americans, spook, spade, whatever you want to call yourself. When other people look at you, they identify you as a group of people that we all belong to. So that one thing should be the bond that should always keep us together, especially those who have enough sense to know the difference. So I want to encourage everyone to participate, join the parade, put your car in the parade. It's a people's parade. Garvey had thousands of people parading for themselves, the uplift of the race. We want you to participate. We want you to come to the festival. We want you to spend a day. And just for a hook, we're having free watermelon. Thank you.
comment right here. Yes. Excuse me. This not on. Jamal, there's somebody with a car outside blocking his brother in. What kind of car you got? Turquoise Z. I have a Civic. It's a turquoise Z outside. A turquoise?
Hotel, I need your attention. We've got a turquoise Z blocking this brother in. He needs to leave. Who's got a turquoise Z? I know someone got it now. And yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. We got brothers over here at the pool hall shooting pool and dice and stuff. Or should I say dice and things? Oh man, you just said so I could have ran down the whole thing. We have open phone. Right.